Great. So, hello, everyone. My name is Viola, and I'm a senior software engineer. I'm also a Cypress ambassador. I build front ends that handle real money and real data, real health data in the application which I built on the side, which is called a 5-a-day app. And I break them with tests before users get the chance. So today is all about reliable end-to-end authentication flows, not just unit tests, not just playing the tokens in Postman, trying to test your authentication, but the full OpenID Connect plus PKCE dance running in Cypress and tracked in Cypress Cloud. And let me talk a bit about who I am and why I care, because truly this is one of the topics I've been discussing for years now. How can we actually test the authentication correctly, and why would we even do that? Because, you know, if the test is green, why would we bother even doing anything further? But here, I would say very quickly that I care about this topic because in my line of work, I need to make sure on the regulated investment platform that the auth doesn't stay broken. I can't afford to have an oops moment on those platforms because we have compliance, we have FCA regulated environment. So if something breaks, that is on the developers and that is on the company as well. So on the side, I do run my 5-a-day app, and that also uses Cognito, the same as the Fintech app. And I live in the space where one tiny change can quickly alter the whole authentication flow and wreck what real people can experience on the applications when I'm providing them with that. And the tests are the only thing so far that kind of kept me going in the sense of clarity and catching things in the CI early on. And we don't find those bugs in production gladly, neither in my application nor in the actual fintech like primary job I'm doing. So the next thing I've actually wanted to that is about me. So these are the apps I'm working on currently. The first one, the top left corner, is the 5-a-day app that is to track the daily fruit intake, not only fruit, vegetables as well, and it tracks your progress. So quite important to have a stable authentication flow, especially with the sessions that I have, because they will allow you to stay signed in and be notified whenever your session expires or something goes wrong. In the fintech application, it's even more pressure because you have people placing loans, bids, altering their financial situations, their general maybe requirements, something gets updated and the platform is used by many people at the same time. So it's quite a concurrent application where you want to make sure that the authentication stays quite stable, because one thing can happen in the flow, like you're getting stuck in a login loop where you're trying to verify your email, but it goes back to verify your email after you've done that successfully, and the user will go away and use our competitors. So that's quite high stakes job. So hopefully you can see the top of the slides. So this is where I basically wanted to hook you like a bit with the memes, because I feel that memes kind of convert to the real understanding of what we're doing. So on the left, we have Cypress Cloud, which is happy, which is all sweet, are green, all specs pass. So many times I've seen that green testing suite, then you start testing and you start going with UAT and user testing, and it just fails and something doesn't work, doesn't quite go well as you would have hoped. And that's where this thing on the right happens, where the user is trying to log in on the Monday morning and they are stuck in the replay, in the loop, where I've specifically put that icon in there. So you can like feel what the pain will be for the user to be stuck on the login screen where they need to perform some kind of an action in their account. Maybe they have just 5 minutes to do so and they're stuck. So yes, that kind of session expired or redirect loop or stuck in please verify your email, they would be probably because of a config change in Cognito or in your environment variables, something just didn't quite pass in the prod before you actually released it. So we're testing something, but clearly not just auth, and that just matters to humans. So the flow, the actual UX. And the core problem I wanted to actually unpack here is where end-to-end tests in authentication lie to us, in the sense, and how to make them boring and always reliable instead. So we do know that tests lie, but we need to make sure that they are quite boring and just sit there until we need them. So the agenda is quite simple. We'll first go through the auth dance. The auth dance is something that I've created for myself to actually talk about this whole paradigm, the whole framework for the authentication testing, and I'll show you how I translate that into the auth dance. Then I'll talk about the reliable end-to-end authentication and what it is, give you some background on the terms like OpenID Connect, PKCE, and the OAuth 2.0. Then we'll go through some case studies like 5-a-day app that I'm working on. I'll just talk through the actual flows that I've encountered and how the authentication tests were lying to me. And then I'll talk about the Cypress Cloud, how it saves you in practice. I'll also mention Cognito in between the slides. I didn't mention it here. It's just a high-level overview, but I will be mentioning Cognito throughout the slides. And we'll also touch on some fintech partners. And in the end of the session, I will send a PDF checklist for reliable authentication with the best practices that I've actually derived from working with those applications for a long time, and I will share it with you because you've attended. Basically, the auth dance, again, some memes there, to get more sense of what we're doing here. So the wristbands, the things that you get when you're entering a nightclub. And basically, the auth dance for me is the dance itself, the bouncer, and the wristbands. So I like to frame it as a nightclub. And the bouncer is your authorization provider, like in this case, it's Cognito. This is IDP. Then we have a hosted UI page from Cognito, where the user shows the ID, where it's kind of like where you enter a nightclub and you show an ID as proof of identification. Then there is wristbands. So in your code, wristbands are tokens that the bouncer gives you to enter the nightclub, and you are allowed then to get into the restricted areas, just like on the website on the restricted pages. And every OpenID Connect, so OIDC, which is OpenID Connect implementation, is just a variation on this dance. So authenticate, issue tokens, use them to get in your protected parts of the app, and that's essentially what the dance is about. And if we're going to test authentication properly, our tests have to follow the same dance all the time, because we need to understand the dance itself, not to sneak in through like the back door, as it might happen if you are not familiar with the flow. So yes, a bit of the terms here. So OAuth 2.0 is the latest standard. I need to mention though that, well, it is a framework primarily that says that this client can do some action on behalf of this, and this is the user who grants them access to do so. And then we define the code and token exchange through the OAuth. So there is another OAuth prototype in place right now, because I'm quite in the authentication circles. Like I'm always keeping my hands on the pulse with the authentication flows. There is a 2.1 prototype right now with OAuth, which will get rid of the flaky things from OAuth 2.0. It's an RFC standard. I'm not going to go deep into the RFCs today because it's not making sense to me to talk about that. But then OAuth is not the standard at the moment. People are trying to switch to the 2.1 instead of 2.0. OpenID Connect. So that is the logo you see for it. OpenID Connect is just a layer on top of the OAuth 2. They go together, and you can't compare OAuth 2 with OpenID Connect, which is what I see many people do. OpenID Connect is like a layer on top. It's the provider of your identity, and who is the user, what is their sub, email, profile claims. That is what it does. It just provides you with those information bits that you need to authenticate. And PKCE or PKCE, the proof key for code exchange, but I call it PKCE all the time, is just an extra guard which was created for public clients like single-page applications, mobile applications, where you bind authorization code with like the specific client in a client instance, where someone, if they want to steal your code, they cannot trade it for tokens. So it's just, an unnecessary piece of garbage when they steal a token, and PKCE solves that issue now. I would suggest that in 2025 and 2026, the browser apps should be the following way. So the safest default flow that I would go for is authorization code plus PKCE plus OIDC. So if a provider can confirm that they have all three in their offering, then it's a good provider. And Cognito is quite good in that sense. So this diagram, a small diagram that I wanted to show, this is basically where I show a small piece of day-to-day flow where a user goes to the login page in your single page application and goes to Cognito here. And that's the hosted UI that Cognito has by default. And the user logs in there, and Cognito then redirects them back to the API auth callback with the code which you need to authenticate. So that's the flow where you go to the third-party provider, and then you come back to the application where you started. So there's a bit of comments here on the slide, but I'm going to say that basically browser SPA, when it hits, then redirects to hosted UI. The user logs in there, like Cognito redirects back the user to where they were, but Cognito is the one responsible for the user being logged in there. So I also have something that's called next auth in my applications, typically. Not always, but that's a helpful framework that helps you to kind of maintain the best practices because they ship them by default. And that's the auth.js package that you can meet in some applications. And my next auth layer takes that code that you get returned from Cognito, plus then PKCE verifier. Then it calls Cognito token endpoint, and then receives the ID token and access token that you need in order to prove your identity to your initial place of call. We then set an HTTP only cookie, which is a cookie that cannot be just like a local storage removed and stuff like that. It's a secure cookie that represents the session for your current logged in, like yourself being logged into the current session. So OAuth 2.0 in here, it just gives the structure for the exchange. That's it. And OpenID then stays with the on top of the OAuth 2 as just a layer to add the identity of who it is to access the application. And then the PKCE protects the code a bit so that nobody can intercept that. So I want to mention that the good browser authentication actually, don't know if you have this on this slide. I might have the, yeah. Okay, I'll just quickly mention something that's very important here. So it's a good browser authentication would be basically the PKCE, the hosted UI, it's not necessarily, by the way, the hosted UI that you can use for Cognito. You can well make your own one. You can customize your hosted UI as well with a logo, with whatever. But the key is to use the provided tools from Cognito in order to set your authorization flow as smooth as possible. So you would have the code, you would have the PKCE, you would have the hosted UI or your custom UI, and then you have cookie, you would have then validation of that token on the backend or in webhooks or whatever you are setting your backend is. And then there will be the kind of the very clear scenarios to this, because you are using the same essentially the same players in the game all the time, and then you would get in the end the same kind of exit strategy from that flow. So that's how you are ensuring that basically this is my auth dance and I'm doing it right. So modern SPAs, by the way, they have slightly different kind of approach, because the auth tool was not specifically made secure for SPAs. And it has implicit flows which are introducing quite some vulnerabilities to the flows, and that's why they have a new standard in prototype 2.1 that will essentially get rid of those. So authorization code plus PKCE is what we will see in the authorization flows for the SPAs. We'll have some hosted UI, or at least a dedicated auth domain where we can authorize and know that it's custom domain for us. We won't have some bespoke login spaghetti inside the app where you define those roles, you define how the cookie behaves. We're using the provider for this specific thing to make us secure in that sense. And then the backend you will have cookies, obviously, cookies that are HTTP only. We'll have secure cookies, but we will never persist anything in the local storage. Like the session storage is, is not JS readable. So that is good because we cannot manipulate it then. But setting something in the local storage, you're basically exposing your users to the outer world where someone can steal that token and then use it and exploit your application, not just from that user's perspective, but in many other ways. So where Cognito fits in that whole framework. Obviously, a lot of this is already done by Cognito, what I've discussed, what I've talked about, like authorization flows. It is your user database for that kind of authentication flow, because you will use their login UI, you will use their token and key. My apps, they treat Cognito as a single source of truth, so like golden standard, and my authentication flows. Because for testing, I will then work with the separate test user pool, where I will also set a client. So I create and destroy users, and then also tweak maybe some configs with Cognito to test just how vulnerable my configs are and how bad I've set them up for production. So after I grill that, obviously the job of the front end is to use the Cognito correctly, and that is just at most important here, because I see many variations of how you can use it. And for that, I use auth, next auth framework, which kind of helps you to set the best practices. And it takes you literally 20 minutes. From my perspective as a software engineer, it takes you 20 minutes to set something like next auth, and then add Cognito on top with your custom configurations as much as you want, and then start testing. And it's quite quick, efficient, and it's all well tested as well on the side of those frameworks, not just your side. But obviously we have the custom authentication flows, and that's what makes them complex. And that's why we test it with Cypress. So yes, these are some of the nodes that will help you. Cognito is your IDP, and these are some of the important bits. So I have some classic anti-patterns here. This will be in the checklist, obviously. I'm gonna just quickly go through them. So the fun part is that the classic anti-patterns, they have not really changed in the past few years. You've probably seen these things in the wild as well, because if you've tested authentication flows, you probably most likely have encountered the local storage token, which is our fake authentication, which is gonna lie to us on the testing stage. So the tests that just set the local storage fake JWT, which is the token that you want to have, the real token, and then they will visit the index page. Then secret login bypass, which is that page that's gonna happen somewhere in our flow. And this is just gonna be wired for Cypress. Like, it's not gonna be for the real case for the user. It's just gonna be wired for Cypress, which is really bad. And then basically, when someone changes that callback URL and email verification just sends in a different way now incognito, the real users will not be able to log in. And that's where Cypress stays green, because it's running in a completely different universe. It's not your real authentication suite. It's just an isolated environment which you tested once, and it's going to pass every single time because you've created the environment for this. So I would not recommend creating any fake JWTs, any bypass pages. It's very common for developers to bypass some of the stuff when we test, like if in authentication stage where we need to fill out a lot of details, provide some information, we would rather bypass that. But for Cypress tests, you cannot just do that, because the real CI will fail, and you will clearly see that your tests are not testing what the real user are hitting. So Cypress can help with that. That's just a snippet I've put there. There is an explanation on the left, what we are asserting, what we are testing, but essentially we're just taking those details. Like, we go to the login page, we take the Cognito domain, which is a setting that you have to take from your Cognito console. We then go to our fetch from our environment variable file, our email, our password, and then sign in, and then request the session. And Cypress Cloud is quite good because it will keep your session until you want it to expire, which is great because you can replay, you can play with it, you can introduce new things into that test until the session expires. So basically, Cypress tests are helping us to keep abreast of the latest changes of what we're doing. You're probably familiar with how we do it in Cypress Cloud. Not sure how many people here have used Cypress Cloud, but it's it's a different way of integrating it. Rather than doing it all locally, you can now run it in the cloud and then basically integrate that cloud into your PRs or in your main branch where you would be testing the real CI flow. And Cypress will immediately update it, update things for you, send you notifications in like Slack channel, Microsoft Teams channel, wherever you set it to send it to. And you will know if at 3 a.m. something fails for some user, and you'll be able to pick that up quickly rather than waiting for the user to raise a ticket. So that's good. A few things that I know Cypress kind of introduces with the cloud environment, which is parallelization and load balancing. This just basically means that you can actually afford to have real hosted UI, and people being there logging through that hosted UI. So that can pretty much speed up your performance and keep those testing suite fast. Then we have the flake detection, which is surfacing any intermittent IDP, which is identity providers, issues or DNS issues, not just flaky app selectors, which is what typically people pick up. But regarding the DNS hiccups, I've actually just recently had a case where I've just created a testing suite with Cypress Cloud, and we have an application completely failing because EC2 instance basically doesn't run in that container. The container is wrong, or the memory is completely jammed, and we don't have anymore, and we need to auto scale now. And something happened, and we just learned about it just because of Cypress, because the DNS failed and the test didn't run. So that was one of the use cases I want to highlight, because this was really useful, and we didn't have to do it at night. We did it all during the day, and users were able to log back in. So yeah, and notifications, absolutely spot on. I would suggest to start with notifications whenever you set up your Cypress Cloud, or any testing suite in that sense. So that is what I've just talked about. The cloud, helpful in those things. Also going to be in your reliable checklist, so that you can focus on those things when you are next time testing in Cypress Cloud. So yes, that is one of the test cases I wanted to show today. So I had one honest UI login, and that is where basically the correct pattern is. We will be, oh, that is, sorry, I think I'm seeing, yes, I was talking about this one more, but here, I basically wanted to mention that, this is a line test, which has, ignorant tendency in terms of the errors that can happen during the runtime. It will go and run. It will redirect you back to where you were. It will use that fake token that you said for it to use. And then you basically just check in that the page is there. This will result in, real-time 500s, which is the server errors, and potentially you will not even know where they're coming from until you are inspecting the logs. So it's a good idea to, wire up your Cypress tests on top of your application so that you actually take those selectors and use the errors that you've defined in your application so that they are caught and they're seen. And never skip the tests, never block the tests. They need to go and be failing, because a failing test is a good test, because that's the way you are catching those errors and issues early on the time. So the one hosted UI login is what I have currently for my 5-a-day app. So I'm using the hosted UI provided by Cognito. I'm not testing a fake login or some other login point. I'm using particularly that EU West 2 instance of Cognito Hosted UI, which is testing the actual Cognito page where I log in, and maybe there is some issues, maybe there is everything fine, and then it goes back to my application. So I handle a few things with next auth, and then Cypress takes care of the tests. It logs into the hosted UI, it caches the session to log in, and then also it asserts on some of the bits that I've defined it to assert. And this is just the high level review on the slide. There is much more things that you can add to your tests of the authentication flow, especially where you have the timed login, you have the persistent cookies, where you have the actual timeouts on how long you can be on the page to verify and enter your code, to verify your email or phone or any other piece of information. So that's important. I would say though that this is a huge leap from like drop fake token stuff from the local storage, and hope for the best, because this just provides you with the real stuff, with the real actual engagement from the real flow. So that is another snippet I wanted to share with you. That is where we've already logged in. Using that session, and then we go to the account. We're just requesting the session to contain that email. So yes, the next bit is I wanted to mention that the TTLs, the time to live, which is quite an important topic because we are going to be hitting those quite often in the test. So this is one of my failure modes in the quietly dining session, and you have a short TTL, so time to live, or maybe a misconfigured refresh path. So the user logs in, clicks around a bit, like adds some items to their basket, tries to save some other items for the future, make a list for the shopping, which is the typical flow of my 5-a-day app, and then looks at something else basically, and then comes back, presses a button to save, and then suddenly everything explodes. The session has expired, and they're redirected to please sign back in again. And then, in the 5-a-day app, I have a tiny demo endpoint where I see that TTL in real life, that intentionally reproduces that behavior where it fails or it expires. And then a Cypress spec that I have in my testing suite will basically log in through the hosted UI, hit that page, the TTL page, then waits long enough for it to expire, and then asserts that the next action fails in a clean, predictable way. That's the kind of bug replay I would suggest you have in your suites. Because that just demonstrates the real flow, is very good at catching the bugs like that. So, well, it's not even a bug. It's just part of flow, but you want to catch that session expired to make sure that you know what happens afterwards. So the user is actually presented with a clear flow to navigate in your application. So the fintech example, I wouldn't say they particularly vary so much, but the stakes are just higher. So if you can afford to maybe make a mistake in Cypress test and make it super ignorant and let it fly without actually testing something real where people are adding fruits and vegetables into their baskets. In fintech, people are working with money, so something fails and we don't catch that on time using Cypress, then we don't know, we're not notified about that failure, and people lose money. And that's why the flows must be extra clear for fintech application, but the patterns are the same. You just have to think about that the user have a higher stakes in your application, which is a fintech application. So I would say, yeah, the main thing to remember is that we have login, we have some kind of an action like view portfolio, and then the user performs some kind of an action like invest, place bid, sell loan, buy loan, or even withdraw money or place some money into their cash pot to invest. And then basically the patterns here, just good practices that I've already talked about previously. And the Cypress Cloud, yeah, you wanna have that integrated in your PRs, especially because the money flows are the most sensitive ones to have. So yes, that is, yeah, and replays. I would suggest that you use Cloud for replays to see where things get broken. I especially like to use that for the fact that you have a particular points where you can come back to in authentication flow, because authentication flows can be quite complex in where you receive token, what happens after that, where you're setting a session, what if it didn't set, and replays just generally help me with that. So yes, that is a little checklist for everyone here right now, but obviously that's just going to be something in the PDF that I'll share after that session. And that is just the do's and don'ts. Never inject fake tokens into the local storage. Never rely on the login bypass routes or any other demo routes that you would test to bypass the authentication just for the sake of the green lights in your testing suite. And then never ignore any uncaught exceptions in the tests, because they will definitely most likely point to your problems that you have to address before you release something to the master. Yeah, so that is some of the things. Yeah, I've included some of the resources here. Obviously, there's a few of the standards that you could go and read about. They help to create a foundation on how to understand Cognito. Cognito essentially uses everything that Auth 2.0 defined, like literally everything, where you need to add password, change, reset, for example. You would use those particular attributes that they introduce in Auth 2.0, Cognito essentially just takes that and provides a unified service where you need to reset email. You would just add an extra attribute, and you would change that. You can set things in Cognito that would be basically helping you to guard the user's flow, like where you go and change your email address and you don't want to reset it from the Cognito user pool until they've actually verified that new email address. So that is something that Cognito does. It just takes the auth 2.0 plus OpenID Connect plus PKCE and just provides it as a single service so that you have to just take it, integrate it into your application with an SDK, maintain the stable version, and that's all you have to do instead of creating custom solutions that would be hard to maintain, since there's always changes to the standards. There's always changes from the management team to your auth flows, so it's just easier with Cognito. So yes, RFC standards is something that you can read. Definitely worth reading. I would strongly suggest that if you're curious about the authentication flows, you go and read those standards, because they will help you understand how that actually builds on top of what I've talked about today, and how Cypress actually, does help in testing those small things. It just helps putting things on the shelves, like you just understand the flow better. Especially PKCE, how it just guards the flow and helps you verify and trust the user. So yes, there's a few books there that I can also share on the after the presentation. And I would say strongly that you practice those flows in real life. I always try to run a few tests before I start actually rolling out the authentication flow, because this saves the time in terms of having people to test it in real life, and you know your flow because you actually know step by step, because you've seen it in Cypress. And if it fails, it's great. It's amazing. So yes, I think that's all I wanted to cover today. Hopefully I didn't go over the time. I think we still have the time for questions. So if you have any questions, please do ask them.